My name is Jordan, and this is the story of how my life turned upside down in a single conversation. But let me start from the very beginning because without context, you won't understand just how bizarre this story really became. Christy and I got married 5 years ago in a small church in Austin, Texas. The wedding was modest, just close friends and family. I was working as a mechanic at Joe's Auto Service, which belonged to my uncle. Christy was a manager at the local Bank of America branch. It seemed like everything was falling into place perfectly, a small house with a white picket fence in the suburbs, plans for kids in a couple of years, happy evenings in front of the TV with popcorn and Coke. But life, as it turned out, loves to throw curveballs that would make Hollywood screenwriters jealous. The first cracks in our relationship appeared about a year ago. Not that we were fighting or anything like that, we just became a bit more distant from each other. Christy started staying late at work more often. I spent more time in the garage fixing not just other people's cars, but also working on my own projects. We still loved each other, but that passion we had in the beginning had somehow dissolved into the routine of everyday life. Looking back now, I think we were both unconsciously preparing for something. Like animals before an earthquake, sensing tremors that our conscious minds couldn't detect yet. There were small signs. Christy would sometimes stare into space during dinner. I found myself staying later at the shop even when there wasn't much work. We were both carrying invisible weights that we couldn't name. The neighborhood we lived in was one of those typical American suburbs where everyone knew everyone, but nobody really talked about anything important. White houses with green lawns, SUVs in driveways, kids riding bikes on sidewalks. It was the kind of place where secrets festered behind perfect facades, where everyone pretended their lives were exactly as they appeared from the outside. Our house was a modest 2-bedroom ranch style with a small front yard and an even smaller backyard. We'd bought it right after the wedding with help from both our parents. The mortgage payments were manageable and we'd slowly been making it our own, painting the walls, buying furniture piece by piece from garage sales and discount stores. I remember the exact day everything started to unravel, though I didn't know it at the time. It was a Tuesday morning in February and Christy was getting ready for work. She was standing in front of our bathroom mirror, applying mascara, when her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it and her hand froze mid-motion. Just for a second, but I noticed. "Work?" I asked, brushing my teeth. "Yeah," she said, but her voice had a slight tremor. "Just Mike from the credit department about some loan applications." Mike. I'd heard that name a few times over the months, always in the context of work. Mike needed this report. Mike was organizing that meeting. Mike had suggested a new procedure. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Banks are full of Mikes, right? But now, looking back, I realized that was the first time I heard his name accompanied by that particular tone in Christy's voice. A mixture of nervousness and something else I couldn't identify then, but now I know was guilt. Work at the auto shop was steady but not overwhelming. Uncle Joe had built a good reputation over 30 years, and we had a loyal customer base. I enjoyed the work. There's something satisfying about diagnosing a problem and fixing it with your hands. Cars don't lie to you. They break down for specific reasons, and when you fix those reasons, they work again. If only human relationships were that straightforward. My coworkers were good guys. Dave, who'd been with Uncle Joe almost as long as the shop existed. Marcus, a younger guy fresh out of technical college. And Tommy, who specialized in electrical systems and could diagnose wiring problems that left the rest of us scratching our heads. We'd grab beers after work sometimes, talk about sports, complain about difficult customers, share stories about the weird things we'd found in engines. It was during one of these after-work sessions that Dave mentioned something that should have been a red flag. We were at Murphy's Pub, our usual spot, watching a Rangers game on the TV above the bar. "You know," Dave said, nursing his second beer, "Linda's been acting weird lately. Staying late at her job more often, being secretive about her phone. Makes a man wonder, you know?" "Ah, come on, Dave," Marcus laughed. "Linda loves you. You're just being paranoid." "Maybe," Dave shrugged. "But my dad always told me, when a woman starts changing her routine without explanation, pay attention." At the time, I'd laughed along with Marcus. Dave was known for being a bit of a worrier. But his words stuck with me, and over the next few weeks, I found myself unconsciously cataloging Christy's behavior. The late nights at work. The way she'd take her phone with her to the bathroom. How she'd sometimes seem distracted during our conversations, like her mind was somewhere else. But I pushed these observations aside. Christy wasn't the type to cheat. We'd been together for 7 years total, married for 5. She was loyal, honest, dependable. These were the qualities that had attracted me to her in the first place. Besides, everyone goes through phases where they're stressed about work or distracted by life. It didn't mean anything was wrong. The bank where Christy worked was one of those corporate environments that demanded a lot from its employees. Quarterly targets, customer satisfaction scores, regulatory compliance, there was always pressure to perform. She'd come home some evenings looking exhausted, complaining about difficult customers or impossible deadlines. I'd massage her shoulders while she vented about her day, and we'd order takeout and watch Netflix until bedtime. "Mike's been really helpful with the Johnson account," she mentioned one evening in early March. "He knows their business really well, and he's been staying late to help me understand their financing needs." There was again Mike. And again that slight change in her voice when she said his name. "That's good," I said, not really paying attention. I was focused on a particularly satisfying episode of some car restoration show. "He's really dedicated," she continued. "Sometimes I feel bad that he's staying so late just to help me. I should have paid more attention to that comment. I should have asked more questions. But I was tired from a long day of replacing brake pads and changing oil, and all I wanted to do was zone out in front of the TV. The corporate party that would change everything was scheduled for a Saturday night in March. It was being held at the downtown Marriott, some kind of quarterly celebration for meeting targets. Christy had mentioned it weeks in advance, complaining about having to give up a weekend evening for work. "Do I have to go?" I'd asked when she first told me about it. "Spouses are invited but not required," she'd said. "You don't have to if you don't want to. I know you hate these things." She was right. I did hate corporate parties. All that small talk with people I didn't know, discussions about banking regulations and loan portfolios, it wasn't my scene. I preferred staying home with a beer and a good movie, or working on my latest project car in the garage. "I'll probably skip it," I'd said. "You go ahead and represent the family." Another decision I'd come to regret. If I'd gone to that party, none of this would have happened. But that's the thing about life. It's built on a million small decisions that seem insignificant at the time but end up determining everything. The night of the party, Christy spent extra time getting ready. She wore a black dress I'd only seen her wear once before, at her cousin's wedding 2 years ago. She looked beautiful, the dress hugged her curves perfectly, and she'd done something special with her hair that made it shine under the lights. "You look amazing," I told her as she checked herself in the hall mirror one last time. "Thanks," she smiled, but it seemed forced. "I should be home by 11. Maybe midnight if things run late." She kissed me goodbye, a quick peck on the lips, and left. I settled in for an evening of college basketball and leftover pizza. Around 10:30, I dozed off on the couch and I didn't wake up until I heard her key in the lock at 12:45 a.m. "How was the party?" I asked groggily as she hung up her coat. "Fine," she said quietly. "Pretty typical work stuff. I'm exhausted. I'm going to bed." She went straight to the bathroom and I heard the shower running for a long time. When she finally came to bed, she was already in her pajamas and she lay down with her back to me. When I tried to snuggle up to her, she tensed slightly. "Just tired," she murmured when I asked if everything was okay. That was the beginning of the most difficult month of our marriage, though I didn't realize it at the time. Over the next 4 weeks, Christy became increasingly distant. She'd stare off into space during conversations, pick at her food during dinner, and sometimes I'd catch her looking at her phone with an expression I couldn't read. She started having trouble sleeping. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her side of the bed empty. I'd find her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea, staring out the window at our dark backyard. "Can't sleep?" I'd ask. "Just thinking about work," she'd say. But it was more than that. She'd lost weight, not a lot but enough that I noticed. Her clothes started hanging differently on her frame. She'd always had a healthy appetite, but suddenly she was just pushing food around on her plate. "Maybe you should see a doctor," I suggested one evening. "You've been under a lot of stress lately." "I'm fine," she said quickly. "It's just busy season at the bank. Things will calm down soon." I wanted to believe her. It's amazing how much we can rationalize when we don't want to face an uncomfortable truth. Every sign, every change in behavior, I found a reasonable explanation for. She was stressed about work. She was tired. She was dealing with seasonal depression. It couldn't be anything more serious than that. But deep down, in that part of my mind I didn't want to listen to, I knew something was very wrong. The woman I'd been married to for 5 years was disappearing, replaced by someone who looked like her but felt like a stranger. The easy intimacy we'd shared was gone, replaced by a politeness that felt worse than outright conflict. The breaking point came on that rainy Thursday evening in March. It had been one of those gray, depressing days that Texas sometimes throws at you in early spring. The kind of day that makes you remember winter isn't quite finished with you yet. I came home from work earlier than usual. Uncle Joe had let me go at 5 because business was slow and the weather was keeping customers away. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Christy's car was already there, which was unusual. She'd been working late almost every night for weeks. I found her sitting on our old brown couch, the one we'd bought at a thrift store before we got married and kept meaning to replace. She was staring at the wall, her hands folded in her lap, completely motionless. The TV wasn't on. The radio was silent. She was just sitting there in the quiet of our living room as if she was waiting for something. "Hi, honey," I said, hanging up my work jacket on the coat hook by the door. "Hi," she replied, but she didn't look at me. There was something in the air, a tension I could feel as soon as I walked in. It reminded me of those moments before a thunderstorm when the atmosphere becomes thick and electric, when you know something big is about to happen. "You're home early," I observed, settling into my recliner across from her. "Jordan," she said suddenly, cutting off whatever small talk I was about to make. "We need to talk." Those 4 words. Every married man knows they never herald anything good. My heart rate immediately picked up, and I felt that familiar flutter of anxiety in my chest. But even then, even with all the warning signs I'd been ignoring for weeks, I wasn't prepared for what came next. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "What's on your mind?" Christy took a long, shuddering breath. Her hands were shaking slightly, and I could see her wrestling with something internally. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of rain beginning to patter against our windows. "I did something terrible, Jordan," she finally whispered. "Something that might destroy our marriage." Time seemed to slow down. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw the weight she'd been carrying for weeks written all over her face. The sleepless nights, the loss of appetite, the distant behavior. Suddenly it all made horrible sense. "What did you do?" I asked, though part of me already knew. She started, then stopped, closing her eyes tight as if she could make this moment disappear. "I was with another man." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt the air leave my lungs, and for a moment the room seemed to tilt sideways. This was it. This was the conversation that would divide our life into before and after. "When?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "A month ago. At the corporate party. The one at the Marriott." Her voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear her. "I had too much to drink. You know I don't usually drink much, but that night." She didn't need to finish. I knew exactly which night she meant. The night she came home late, went straight to the shower, slept with her back to me. The night that had started this month of distance and strange behavior. "Who?" I asked, though I thought I already knew. "Mike Anderson from the credit department." "You don't know him." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "It didn't mean anything, Jordan. It was one night, one terrible mistake. I've been dying inside ever since. I can't eat, I can't sleep, I can't even look at myself in the mirror." Mike. Of course it was Mike. The name that had been cropping up in conversations for months, always with that slight change in her voice. The helpful coworker who stayed late, who knew the Johnson account so well, who was so dedicated to his work. I stood up abruptly and started pacing around our small living room. My mind was racing, trying to process this information, trying to fit it into the story of our life that I thought I knew. 5 years of marriage, 7 years together total, and it had come to this. "How?" I asked, still pacing. "How did it happen?" "We've been working late together a lot recently," she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "On some complicated commercial loans. He's really good at his job and I was learning a lot from him. At the party we were talking about work stuff and then the conversation moved to other things. Personal things. And the wine was flowing and—" "I don't want the details," I interrupted. I couldn't bear to hear the specifics of how my wife had ended up in bed with another man. "Jordan, please, you have to understand, it meant nothing. It was just alcohol and stupidity and a moment of weakness. I regretted it the second it happened. I tried to pretend it never occurred, but the guilt has been eating me alive." I stopped pacing and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was a wreck, thin, pale, exhausted. Whatever had happened between her and Mike, it had clearly destroyed her as much as it was destroying me. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. "Because I can't live with the lie anymore. Because you deserve to know. Because I love you and I can't stand having this secret between us." She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "And because I'm hoping. I'm praying that somehow we can get through this." I sat back down, this time on the edge of the coffee table, facing her directly. The rain outside was getting heavier, and I could hear it drumming on our roof with increasing intensity. It seemed appropriate somehow, like the weather was providing a soundtrack for the storm that had just broken over our lives. "Say something," she pleaded. Scream at me, throw something, tell me you hate me. Just don't sit there in silence. But I couldn't speak. I was too busy dealing with my own internal earthquake. Every assumption I'd had about my life, about my marriage, about my wife, was crumbling. The future I'd imagined, kids in a couple of years, growing old together in this house, celebrating our golden anniversary surrounded by grandchildren, all of it was suddenly uncertain. And then, in the middle of all that chaos in my head, something strange happened. Instead of the pure rage I expected to feel, I felt relief? Not happiness, not forgiveness, but a weird kind of relief, like a weight I didn't even know I was carrying had suddenly lifted from my shoulders. Because I had a secret too. A secret I'd been carrying for 3 years, a secret that had shaped every day of our marriage since it happened. And suddenly, sitting there looking at my wife's tear-stained face, I realized that maybe it was time for my secret to come out too. Christy, I said slowly, and something in my tone made her stop crying and look at me carefully. What? I need to tell you something too. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, preparing to say words I'd never imagined I would say out loud. 3 years ago, I cheated on you too. If a bomb had gone off in our living room, the effect couldn't have been more dramatic. Christy literally fell back against the couch cushions as if she'd been physically struck. Her mouth fell open and all the color drained from her face. What? She whispered. It was after Dave's party at work. You remember, when we were celebrating getting that big Toyota contract? I got drunk. Drunker than I'd ever been in my life. There was this woman there, Sarah Williams, who was helping organize the party. Red hair, maybe 25 years old. She turned out to be a real classic car enthusiast. She knew more about vintage Mustangs than most guys I work with. I paused, watching Christy's face as she processed this information. She looked like she was having trouble breathing. One conversation led to another, a few more beers, and we ended up spending the night together at her apartment on the west side of town. I woke up the next morning with a terrible hangover and an even worse case of guilt. The silence that followed was deafening. We sat there staring at each other, two people who had just admitted to betraying the most sacred promise they'd made to each other. The rain continued its assault on our windows, but inside the house, everything was perfectly still. You never told me, Christy finally said, her voice barely audible. No, I never told you. I never told anyone. But from that day on, I couldn't touch a drop of alcohol. You thought I quit drinking for health reasons, but the truth is I couldn't stand the smell of beer without remembering that night. That's when I started running in the mornings, hitting the gym after work. I was trying to punish myself, to burn out the guilt I felt every day. We looked at each other across the small space of our living room, and I could see that we were both thinking the same thing. Here we were, two people who had built a marriage on love and trust and honesty, and we'd both been carrying around these terrible secrets. We'd both crossed the line that we'd promised never to cross. So we're both. Christy started. Yeah, I nodded. We're both cheaters. It should have been the end of everything. 2 betrayals should have been twice as devastating as one. But somehow, in that moment, it felt more like a strange kind of balance had been restored. We were both guilty. We'd both failed. We'd both been living with shame and regret. What do we do now? She asked. I looked at my wife, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago, but I also saw someone who was just as flawed and human as I was. Someone who had made a terrible mistake and was drowning in guilt because of it. Someone who was brave enough to tell the truth even when it might cost her everything. I don't know, I said honestly. But maybe the fact that we both screwed up doesn't have to be the end of everything. Maybe it's just information. Information. Yeah. Information about who we really are. About what we're capable of. About the fact that we're not perfect people living in a perfect marriage. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to organize my thoughts. I've been carrying around guilt about Sarah for 3 years. Every day I've wondered if I should tell you. Every day I felt like a fraud for pretending to be a faithful husband when I knew I wasn't. And now I feel. I don't know how to describe it. Lighter maybe? Like a weight has been lifted. Not because cheating was okay, but because the secret doesn't have power over me anymore. Christy was quiet for a long time, thinking. Outside, the storm was reaching its peak, rain lashing against the windows, wind howling around the corners of our house. It felt like nature was expressing all the emotions we were too overwhelmed to properly feel. Do you still think about her? She asked eventually. About Sarah? No, never. After that morning, I never saw her again. She sent me one text message apologizing for what happened, and I deleted it without responding. I couldn't even look at other women for months afterward. The guilt was too strong. I paused. What about Mike? He tried to call me the next day but I didn't answer. Then he sent an email saying he was sorry and that it would never happen again. I deleted that too and avoided him at work for weeks. He finally requested a transfer to another branch. So he's gone? Yeah, he's gone. Started at the downtown branch 2 weeks ago. We fell into silence again, each of us processing not just our own confession but our spouses as well. I found myself thinking about the strange mathematics of betrayal. Did two wrongs somehow make a right? Did the fact that we were both guilty change anything about what we'd done to each other? Jordan, Christy said suddenly. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you hate me? I considered the question carefully. Did I hate her? I certainly felt hurt, disappointed, betrayed. But hate? Looking at her sitting there, vulnerable and broken and completely honest for maybe the first time in our marriage, I realized that hate wasn't what I felt at all. No, I said. I don't hate you. I'm hurt and I'm angry and I feel betrayed. But I don't hate you. Do you hate me? No, she said immediately. I was so afraid you were going to leave me when I told you about Mike. But now, knowing that you went through the same thing, that you carried the same guilt, I don't know. It's weird, but I feel closer to you right now than I have in months. That was exactly what I was feeling too, though I couldn't quite put it into words. Here we were, having just confessed to the worst things we'd ever done to each other, and somehow I felt more connected to my wife than I had since that night 3 years ago when I came home from Dave's party and lied about why I looked so guilty and hungover. What does this mean for us? I asked. Where do we go from here? I don't know, she admitted. I was prepared for you to throw me out tonight. I wasn't prepared for this. She gestured vaguely between us. Maybe we need to figure out why it happened, I suggested. Both times. Maybe there's something about our marriage that made it possible. You mean like we weren't happy? I don't know. Were we happy? Before Sarah, before Mike. Christy thought about it. I thought we were. But looking back, maybe we were just comfortable. Maybe we'd stopped really seeing each other. I know I took you for granted, Jordan. I stopped appreciating all the little things you did for me. I stopped trying to be interesting to you. I did the same thing, I admitted. I got lazy. I stopped courting you. I stopped trying to be the kind of husband you'd want to come home to every night. So maybe this is partly our fault. Both of us. Maybe. But that doesn't excuse what we did. No, it doesn't excuse it. But maybe it explains it. We talked until 3 a.m. that night. We talked about everything, our childhoods, our dreams, our fears, our marriage. We talked about the slow way couples can drift apart without realizing it, about how easy it is to stop seeing your spouse as a person and start seeing them as just part of the furniture of your life. We talked about the night Sarah and Mike had been tempting because they represented something new, something exciting, something that made us feel desired in a way we hadn't felt in years. We talked about the guilt we'd both carried, the way it had poisoned our ability to be fully present in our marriage. And somewhere in the middle of all that talking, something shifted. We started really seeing each other again, not as the comfortable, predictable person we'd been living with, but as the complex, flawed, interesting human being we'd fallen in love with in the first place. I want to try again, Christy said as we finally headed to bed. I want to see if we can build something better than what we had before. It won't be easy, I warned her. Trust doesn't just come back overnight. I know. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we need to earn each other back. The next few months were the hardest of our marriage. We decided to see a counselor, Dr. Patricia Henley, who specialized in couples who had experienced infidelity. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had a way of cutting through our excuses and defensive reactions to get to the heart of what was really wrong. The good news, she told us during our third session, is that you're both equally guilty. That actually makes recovery easier than when only one partner has cheated. How is that good news? Christy asked. Because neither of you gets to be the victim. Neither of you gets to take the moral high ground. You both have to do the work of rebuilding trust and you both have to forgive. It's more balanced. Dr. Henley was right, though it took me a while to see it. Over the weeks and months that followed, Christy and I slowly learned how to be married to each other again. We learned how to have difficult conversations without attacking each other. We learned how to be vulnerable without being defensive. We learned how to ask for what we needed instead of assuming our partner should just know. It wasn't a smooth process. There were setbacks, arguments, nights when one or both of us wondered if we were just prolonging the inevitable. There were triggers, the mention of certain names, certain songs on the radio, certain dates on the calendar that reminded us of our respective betrayals. But there were breakthroughs too. The first time we made love after our confessions, tentative, emotional, almost like we were both virgins again. The first time we could joke about our situation without it feeling forced. The first time I could hear the name Sarah without feeling a stab of guilt. The first time Christy could walk past a Bank of America without thinking about Mike. Slowly we started building something new. Not the marriage we'd had before, that was gone forever. But something different, something based on a more complete understanding of who we really were. We were both people capable of betrayal, but we were also both people capable of forgiveness, growth, and change. You know what's funny? Christy said one evening about 6 months after our big confession. We were sitting on our front porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. What's that? I feel like I know you better now than I did before. All those years we were together and we were both hiding these huge parts of ourselves. The parts that could make mistakes? The parts that were human, she corrected. Perfect people are boring, Jordan. Perfect marriages are boring. Maybe we needed to almost lose each other to remember why we fell in love in the first place. A year after our mutual confessions, we renewed our wedding vows. Not in a big ceremony, just the two of us and Dr. Henley in her office. But the words meant more to me the second time around because I knew exactly what I was promising. I was promising to love someone who was capable of hurting me deeply, and I was asking for her promise to love someone who was equally capable of hurting her. I promise to be honest with you, I said, looking into Christy's eyes. Even when the truth is ugly. Even when it's hard to say and hard to hear. I promise to see you as you really are, she responded. Not as the perfect husband I wished you were, but as the complicated, flawed, wonderful man you actually are. Dr. Henley smiled as she witnessed our renewed commitment. This, she said, is what real marriage looks like. Not two perfect people living a perfect life, but two imperfect people choosing to love each other anyway. Today, 2 years after that rainy March evening when our world fell apart, we're different people living in a different marriage. We check in with each other regularly, not in a paranoid, controlling way but in a way that keeps us connected. We've instituted a weekly honesty hour, where we tell each other things we might otherwise keep to ourselves. Sometimes it's big stuff, sometimes it's small, but the habit of radical honesty has become the foundation of our rebuilt relationship. We still see Dr. Henley once a month, partly for maintenance and partly because we've grown to value her perspective. She reminds us that marriage is not a destination but a journey, and that the work of loving someone never really ends. You're not the same couple who walked into my office 2 years ago, she told us during our most recent session. You've been through the fire and come out stronger. Not unscathed, nobody comes through infidelity unscathed, but stronger. She's right. We're not the same people we were before. We're more honest, more intentional, more grateful for what we have. We don't take each other for granted anymore because we know how easily it can all disappear. Do I still think about Sarah sometimes? Rarely, but yes. Do I regret what happened with her? Absolutely. But I no longer torture myself with guilt about it because I've learned that guilt without action is just self-indulgence. Instead, I channel that regret into being a better husband to Christy every day. Does Christy still think about Mike? She says no, and I believe her. The guilt and shame she carried for that month after their encounter seems to have been completely released through the process of confession and forgiveness. Are we happier than we were before our respective affairs? That's a complicated question. We're more aware of how precious and fragile our relationship is. We're more intentional about nurturing it. We're more honest with each other and with ourselves. In many ways, yes, we're happier. But it's a different kind of happiness, more mature, more tested, more real. People sometimes ask me if I would change what happened if I could go back in time. It's a fair question. Would I prevent Sarah from happening? Would I prevent Mike from happening? Would I spare us both the pain of betrayal and the long, difficult work of rebuilding trust? I honestly don't know. What I do know is that those two betrayals, as painful as they were, forced us to confront some hard truths about ourselves and our marriage. They made us realize that we'd been sleepwalking through our relationship, taking each other for granted, assuming that love alone would be enough to sustain us without any effort or attention. Maybe we could have learned those lessons without cheating on each other. Maybe we could have woken up to what we were losing before we actually lost it. But maybe not. Maybe some people need to almost destroy what they have before they can appreciate its true value. What I can say with certainty is that we're stronger now than we were before. Our marriage has been stress-tested in the most brutal way possible, and it survived. We've seen each other at our worst and chosen to stay anyway. We've forgiven the unforgivable and learned that love really can conquer almost anything, if both people are willing to do the work. Are we a cautionary tale or a success story? Maybe we're both. We're proof that good people can make terrible choices. We're proof that even the strongest marriages can crack under pressure. But we're also proof that it's possible to come back from betrayal, that trust can be rebuilt, that love can survive even the worst mistakes. You know what we are? Christy said to me just last week as we were cleaning up after dinner. We're that weird couple who almost destroyed each other and somehow ended up more in love than ever. She's right. We are a weird couple. We're the couple who confessed to cheating on each other on the same rainy night. We're the couple who decided that two wrongs might not make a right, but they can make a beginning. We're the couple who learned that sometimes you have to break something completely before you can rebuild it properly. And you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.